Hello everyone. We are from GDG Adelaide, and I have Siddharth here. So this is our first event for 2021 from GDG Adelaide, and today Siddharth's going to give you explanation about Angular with Firebase authentication. So if you have any question, just wait till the end. Siddharth will be able to answer any of the questions, and we also have a quiz as well in at the end. So any two-person lucky winners will be able to get some prizes. So Siddharth, I'm going to give you the stage. Okay, yeah,
All right, thank you so much.
you can.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. I hope you all are doing great and staying safe wherever you are. Uh, it's been difficult the last year, and I hope everybody is safe. Um, so first of all, welcome. Thank you for joining in and taking the time to watch this YouTube live. Uh, my name is Siddharth Ajmera. I'm a Google developer expert in Angular, and I'll be talking about Firebase and Firebase authentication specifically, and how we can implement things like sign in with sign in with Google or any other social platform in our Angular applications. So I don't really have the slides as such, and I'll be going impromptu. So I'll just quickly share my screen and we'll go through a few uh, topics as such. So, okay, I think I'm sharing my screen. And all right, so these are a few things that we are going to cover. So first things first, what exactly is Firebase? So I'll just go to Google and open up the Firebase website. So this is what Firebase is. It is a suite of, it's basically a platform. It's a suite of all the services that you can use to build an application from scratch, but not just to build it. There are some other tools and services as well that Firebase platform provides that you can use in order to monitor the application. You can release it, you can engage your customers and do stuff like that. So it is a suite of all these different tools and services. Uh, when it comes to building things using Firebase, you can have things like the database services. So that's their Cloud Firestore, and they also had the real-time database. Then you can use Firebase as a storage bucket. So there's cloud storage for it. You can use Firebase for hosting your applications. So there's Firebase hosting for it. You can also do serverless cloud functions using Firebase cloud functions. And specifically in today's session, we are going to talk about Firebase authentication. So what exactly is Firebase authentication? Well, it's again a service from the Firebase platform that you can use to build multi-platform sign-in capabilities or sign-up capabilities into your applications. Not just for Angular or for the web, but you can also use it to implement authentication and authorization using social sign-ins like Google Sign-In, Facebook Sign-In, and all these other services in your Android as well as your iOS applications as well. Today, we will be talking specifically just about doing something similar in our Angular applications. So yeah, that's what the whole intent here is. Now, instead of talking about it, I'll probably show you what we are going to do. And other than that, like I said, it's all going to be completely impromptu. So uh, maybe the GDG Adelaide team might have communicated that this session is going to be like a 1 hour session, but it probably might get extended to like 1.5 hours or so. So please bear with me on that. All right. So what exactly are we going to build as such is the question. So I'll just serve up something that I've come up with like yesterday, just so that I could show you what Firebase has as far as the capabilities goes when it comes to Firebase authentication. So, all right, now the application is served and up and running, so I can just probably go to localhost 4200 and it takes me to this URL. Uh, there are just two routes. It's a very simple application, but then it gives you a feel of what Firebase is capable of. Again, this is just like a scratch on the surface. It's just a tip of an iceberg. Firebase authentication and authorization services has quite a lot more features than just what I'll be demonstrating today. So that being said, let's go through the sign-in process. So in this application, I've implemented sign-ins using two different services. One is Google, which is like the simplest and the easiest thing to do, and the other one is GitHub, which is also relatively simple. All you need to do is just grab your client ID and client secret and provide it in the Firebase console, and we'll be seeing how we can do that. And once that's done, you can just log in with GitHub as well and implement that in your Angular applications. So once I click on Google sign in, you'll see that a model pop-up opens up, and like maybe not a model pop-up, but like a, yeah, like a different screen. And then it asks you to select a particular account that you want to log in with in this application. So let me just select the other one, which is this. As soon as I select this, you'll see that it's going to navigate me to the profile section, and here is a very small subset of the data that Firebase provides us with once the user is logged in. So things like my profile photo, my display name, my email, and stuff like that. Right now, at this point, I can just click on logout and it takes me back to the login page. Now, this is also guarded in the sense that I cannot directly navigate to the profile, even if I type that in and try to navigate to it, because I'm not signed in as such, right? So it shouldn't allow me that. This is one way of doing things. The other way is that you can also redirect the user the to the to the social website that you want your user to log in with, and then redirect them back to your website once they have logged in successfully. So that's what we'll be doing using GitHub. So I'll click on the login with GitHub button, and then you'll see that it redirected me first to some URL. And since I'm already logged in to GitHub, it took that account into consideration and redirected me back to my application, and automatically redirected me to the profile section here. Here as well, you'll see that I have a different display picture, a different email address, and a different name, right? And I can again click on logout, and it takes me back to the login page. So this is like a very simple application that we will be building in today's session. So what exactly do we need for this? Well, first of all, we'll be needing an Angular application. I already have Angular CLI installed on my machine, so I can just directly go to uh, VS Code. And let me just zoom this in a bit just so that it's legible to everybody. And I can navigate to desktop, which is where I keep all my uh, code samples. And here I'm just going to create a new application. I already have Angular CLI installed, by the way, so I can just do like an ng -- version in order to check the version. I currently am on 11.2.3 of Angular CLI, right? So I can then go and type ng new, and I'll give the name of this application as, let's say, GDG Adelaide Firebase Auth demo. And as soon as I press enter, it's going to ask me a few questions, things like whether I need strict type checking in my application. Yes, I do. Do I need routing? You've already seen that we navigate the user from login to profile routes and then back, right? So we definitely need routing in here. So I'll select that. As far as the styles are concerned, I usually go with SCSS. So that's what I'll be using here. And then it starts building the whole package and installing dependencies for me. So while that is happening, let's go to the next step. So the next step is to have uh, an application on the Firebase console. So Firebase console is a place where you analyze your application. It's like some sort of a dashboard that uh, Firebase provides you with, where you can enable or disable features and do stuff like that, right? So In order to navigate to there, you can just type in console.firebase.google.com, and you must be logged in with a Google account as such. Now I'm logged in with my company account, so I'll probably change that to my personal account first. And now I have changed to my personal account, and uh, this is like the home screen for Firebase console. Now for this demonstration, I'll quickly create a new application, and let's call this GDG Adelaide Firebase Auth demo, and it's like longer than 30 characters. So let's just call it Firebase demo. All right. And then click continue. And it's also going to ask me what account it should be using for Google Analytics uh, on the third step. So I'll select my default account for Firebase. That's the only option that I get. And then I'll click on create project. All right. So while this is happening, and let's monitor if our Angular app is created or not. And it seems that it's created. So I can navigate to GDG Adelaide Firebase Auth demo. I'll cd into it, and then here I can just run ngserve for the time being. Uh, and once that's done, it's going to now let it's saying that the port 4200 was already in use, so I'll probably kill that so that we can use it. And let's try running ngserve again in here. And yeah, so our application on Firebase console is also created. Now, as I've said, this is the space where you get to play around with all the different services that are provided by Firebase. So things like authentication and authorization. There's Cloud Firestore for your database needs. There's real-time database as well. There's storage for that you can use as a storage bucket, and so on and so forth. But here we are only concerned about the authentication and authorization part. That's one thing. The second thing is that in order for your Angular application to know that you are using Firebase services and you are using this particular project on the Firebase console for your Angular application, you also have to somehow bind these two things together. So bind uh, your Firebase console project to your Angular application. And this binding takes place when you start adding an app to your Firebase project. So that's exactly what we are going to do. In order to do that, as soon as you navigate to your project page, there's this web icon that you see. Now, since Angular is generally used for web, that's what I'll be using here. So I'll click on the web thing here, and let's just say that the name is exactly this. So GDG Adelaide Firebase Auth or Firebase demo. And I don't really need hosting as such. So I'll just not check that and register the app. And once that's done, it's going to give me some keys as such, which I'll be using soon, right? So let's let this stay on this, and let's see if our application is up and running. It seems that our application is up and running, so I can navigate to localhost 4200. And this is the sort of UI that you get to see on a starter Angular CLI project. Right. Now, if we go back to the application that we already had, you might have noticed that, let me just bring that up once again so that we have like some sort of a reference point. So I'll just run ngserve on this one, and let's use a different port, yes. Right. So it's generating and building the application once again. Uh, it has done that now. So I can just open this application now. This is this one right here. Now you'll see that there are two routes. One is the login route, and the other one was the profile route once the user is actually logged in, right? So let's try doing that once again. Right, so there are these two routes. So definitely for my Angular project, I will need these two routes. So let's just open up this folder, which is GDG Adelaide Firebase Auth demo, and I'll press open. All right. Okay. And let us run ng serve once again. So I'll do that. Right. So as I was saying, there are these two routes that we have to implement. One is for login and the other one is for profile. And also while these two things are happening, we also need to render specific components when these two routes are reached. So it might also be a good idea to create those components. So I'll open up a new terminal window and then let's just create two different components, one for login and one for profile. So ng generate C, which stands for component, and I usually tend to create all my components inside a folder named components. So that's what I'm going to do. And inside the components folder, we will create a login component, and we will also create a profile component. So that's done. Perfect. Now, once this is done, let's go to the app routing module. This is the routing module that got created because we answered that question wherein it asked us whether we want routing in our Angular application or not, and we specified yes. So it creates that module for us. Uh, and here I'll just specify multiple routes that my application supports. So the first route is with the path login. And in that case, I need to navigate the user to the login component. In the second scenario, wherein the path is profile, I need to navigate the user to the profile component. And we'll also have a catch-all route here just in case the user tries to navigate somewhere else. And in that case, we'll always redirect the user to the login route for simplicity's sake. You can choose some other behavior, but just for simplicity's sake, I'll just navigate the user back to the login route. And once this is done, we already have the app routing module in our app module. So that's right there in the imports array. So with this, if I navigate to our localhost 4200/login, you'll see that it by default says login works, right? That's what we have as login here. And if I go to profile, it also says profile works. So the the routing is now working and it's working as expected. Let's quickly go back to the app component and get rid of everything else other than the router outlet that it generated for us. So I'm going to go to the extreme bottom and let's just cut that, get rid of everything else, and just paste in the router outlet. And with this, we'll just see that there is this profile works. And if I go to login, then it says login works. As simple as that. Now, the styling is a bit off, and I cannot really type all the styles by hand as such. So I'm just going to use Bootstrap. And so I'll just I'll just install Bootstrap here. And let's see what version Bootstrap is on at the moment. So at the moment, it's probably on 4.6, but I'll just use the current version, which is this beta version here. So while installing, I'll do npm install bootstrap at the version number so that it installs this specific version for it, right? Also, since we are using Firebase in our Angular application and just working with the native JavaScript APIs that Firebase exposes, it sometimes becomes a bit difficult and you end up writing more code. And so in order to avoid that, the Firebase team itself also has an Angular specific package for using Firebase services. And the name of that package is @Angular/Fire. So that's where I'll be navigating to now. This is the package that has Angular specific modules that you can import in your application in order to achieve things that are exposed by the Firebase platform in an easier way as an Angular developer. So highly recommended. I'm just going to use this one for this demo as it just makes our lives easier, right? So first of all, I'll go through the quick start guide in order to start with the project. I think we have already created an Angular application. Uh, I'll use the I'll use this ng-add schematic in order to add Firebase capabilities into our Angular application. So let me just uh, stop the currently running uh, Angular process, and then let's add Angular Fire. While doing this, it's probably going to ask us a few questions on things like which specific application do we want to work with in this case. So it's going to do that like in a while. It takes usually like 2 to 3 minutes for it to install these dependencies. And once it does that, it asks us which specific project on the Firebase console do we want to use here. So I think I'm going to use the Firebase demo one, which is this project right here. So I'll select that. And once that is done, it is going to have, it will probably have installed all the specific dependencies for us. Now we already have Bootstrap, and we also have the Firebase, the Angular Fire specific dependencies in our Angular application. So let's start running ngserve once again. And at this point on, we already have these components created. So I'll start integrating Firebase into my Angular application. And in order to do that, I'll just create another module which is specific to anything that Firebase exposes. So I'll create a separate module for it. Now, this is like, again, subjective, wherein you can decide to create a new module for doing these library specific things. But since this application is very small and I'm going to use basically all the services that are exposed by this new module that I'm going to create, uh, I'll just do that this way. So I'll generate a module this time around, and I'll call this app-firebase. And this is going to create a new module file for us, which it generated right here, this one. And this is where we make things specific to Firebase. So I think the first thing that needs to be done is to initialize the Firebase app from the Firebase console in our Angular application. And so there's a specific thing that we need to do there. That thing is that we have to import the Angular Fire module and then call initialize app on it, and also pass it some API related configuration. This API related configuration is something that we got here once we created that web application on the Firebase console for our Angular app, right? So, and this configuration is something that you usually store in the environment files. So I'll just copy this, and or maybe let's just go to this documentation once again, and let's copy this whole Firebase object. Now in the environments file, we have two files, but I'll use the dev one for now. And these are all our Firebase specific API keys. So I'll just go here, copy these configuration and paste them here. Now I'm also getting like red squiggly lines in here, and that's probably the TSLint complaining that I'm using double quotes instead of single quotes, which it's not really happy about. And I think if I zoom this out a bit, you'll probably also see somewhere here that Prettier is probably not happy with what it's seeing as well. So I use this code formatter called Prettier, and it's also highly opinionated in the industry. So I'd highly recommend you all to check that out. Now, in order for it to work, it can either work out of the box, or you can make it project specific, wherein you create a Prettier config in your project and tell it what specific configuration does Prettier follow while reformatting your code. So I'll create a new file here, call it prettierrc .prettierrc, and then this is like more or less like a JSON file, and there's this property called single quote, which is by default false. So I'm just going to set that to true, And if I go back here and press save, then you'll see that the double quotes were changed to single quotes now, right? So this is all working as expected. Perfect. Uh, Once this is done, I'm going to go back to registering my registering my Firebase application or my Firebase console application and also initialize it in my Angular app. So I'll get rid of the common module, paste this in here. I can also get rid of the common module from the imports. Let's save that. Let's import this from Angular Fire. Let's import the environments from environment/environment, and off we go. Perfect. I don't need the declarations array as such, so I'll get rid of that. But I do need another module in here, and I also need to export it. This module that I'll be using is specific to the service of Firebase that I have to use. Now, the service of Firebase that I have to use is Firebase Authentication, right? So for that, there's a separate module, and the name of this module is Angular Fire Auth module. And this module is something that is supposed to be imported from @angular/fire/auth. All right, so that's done. I'll copy this and move to my app module and also add this module to my imports array. And let's add an import for it. There we go. So there's our import right there. Perfect. So let's close this. I think we are done with this as well. Perfect. All right. Now, along with this, what shall we do? Let's first create a service. Now, this service is going to be responsible for anything that is related to contacting with the Firebase services in order to log the user in with using a specific sign-in provider or log the user out. Now, what exactly is a sign-in provider? Well, you can think of the sign-in provider as a specific configuration that tells Firebase that this is the social service that you have to log in with. So if you are logging in with Google, then you have to use the Google sign-in provider. If you want to log in with GitHub, then you need to use the GitHub sign-in provider. And all these sign-in providers as such will be available to you right on the Firebase console. So if you navigate to the authentication part of it, there is a section for sign-in methods. So let's click on Get Started here. And you'll see that there is a sign-in methods tab. And these are all the different services with the help of which you can implement sign up and login in your Angular apps. So there's email and password, there's phone, Google, there's Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, Yahoo, Microsoft, Apple. There's even anonymous sign-ins. So at the moment, the easiest one to implement is the Google sign-in. So in order to use Google sign-in in our Angular applications, we will have to enable it on the Firebase console. So that's exactly what I'm going to do at the moment. I'll click on this edit icon here, click on enable, and it gives some things by default. So at the moment, it's saying the project ID is this, but if you want the project ID to be something else, like this one, for instance, so demo, I can use that. And the support email is required. So I'll select my email address in here and I just save it. As soon as I do that, you'll notice that it has enabled Google sign-in. It's as simple as that, right? Awesome. So now Google sign-in is enabled. And as I was saying, in our Angular side of things, I'll have to implement a service so that that service can communicate with the Firebase services so that it can tell it to log in or log out, right? And our components will just call methods on this service, right? Because these services are some things that might be used in several different parts of your application once your application grows. So it's probably a better idea to abstract this out into a service and then inject this service as a dependency in your multiple Angular components. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. All right, so in order to create the service, let's clear the console and I'll do ng generate service. And again, like components, I like to place most of my services inside a services folder, and I'll create an auth folder as well. So I type in auth/auth so that it creates an auth folder, and inside that it creates the auth service for me. As soon as I press enter, it might have created a services folder, an auth folder inside that, and the auth service right here. Okay, so by the way, let's check if the app module has app Firebase. Yes, it does. So that's all sorted. Now let's go back to the docs here and see how they implement things like Firebase authentication. So I'll go back to the docs and let's open up the auth docs. Let's go to the get started. And here is something that they import, which they'll also use. That's the first thing. And they inject that as a dependency. So let's actually copy this whole thing up. And we'll see what each thing is doing here. And let's also import the Firebase. All right. So what exactly is happening here? Well, they are injecting the auth, which is the Angular Fire auth service as a dependency. And this auth thing has a lot of methods on it that can be used. And we can call these methods in order to implement login and sign up in different ways, providing it with different types of arguments, right? So I don't want this to be public, so I'll just make it private, and I'll also make it protected. Sorry, not protected, read only. Right? And here again, TSLint is complaining because with Angular 11, you get those strict type checkings. So it needs to know the type of the return type of these methods. So that's now done. Perfect. Now, as you can see, in order to log in, all we have to do is just call this sign in with pop-up method and give it the provider that we have to log in with, which is Google in this case. As simple as that. And once that's done, you will see that Google login pop-up happening, and then you can just select an account and do stuff like that. So it's as easy as that. And signing out is again as easy as calling the sign out method, right? But in this case, since we are going to call these methods from a component, the component needs to somehow know that something has happened, right? So these methods can certainly not return void. They'll have to tell the component that something has happened. And so in order to tell those components, in order to make this a bit more reactive, I'll return some observable from here. Now let's see what sign in with pop-up returns. So it returns a promise of type firebase.auth.user credential. So I'll take this thing as a return type, copy that, and paste that here. And I'll return. And since this is returning, this method is returning a promise, I'll have to make it an observable. And so I'll use the from creation operator from RxJS in order to achieve that. So that's done. Now you'll see that this method now returns something of type firebase.auth.user credential. On the similar lines, the logout method as well is going to, let's say what it returns. So it returns a promise of type void. And so I can just return from this. And so this will make the return type on the logout method to be observable of type void, right? So the login and the logout methods are complete now, okay? Another thing here that we might need is the capability for any component to know which user has logged in, right? Because there's not a surety that every single component is going to call the login method, and so they will know which user has logged in as such. Some components might just need to know which specific user has logged in. And so in order to tell them, we also probably need to expose some sort of a public user property from this auth service. So most probably this is going to be of type observable, of type, I think, Firebase dot user. Now, where do we get this Firebase user from? Well, luckily, the auth thing that we have here, which is an instance of the Angular Fire auth, has something called an auth state. And the auth state has specific details about the logged in user, right? So we can use that in order to achieve this. Now, how do we get that? Well, I'll create a private user property in here and initialize that to a behavior subject. And this behavior subject is going to be of type this dot auth dot auth state, right? And since we have the user property now, I can just use that, and I'll do something like this dot user dot so the user at this moment is going to return to us a behavior subject of type observable of type Firebase user or null. So uh, in order to return just an observable that is of type Firebase.user from here, I'll probably have to switch the context to uh, point to the inner value of that observable. So I'll just use pipe here, and then inside that pipe, I'll just use a switch map. So switch map, and now the switch map is like an operator from RxJS that we'll have to import. So let's just do that. And that's from rxjs/operators. Okay. And yeah, so inside the switch map, we'll get a user and we'll just return that user. So now the user property, which is not just of type Firebase user, but it's also of type an observable of Firebase user or null. So we get the user property here now. So with that, I can now successfully use the auth service in my login component, for instance, right? So let's try doing that. So first we'll have to create the login component. Now at the moment, the login component is completely empty. So let's just add some markup here. Now, in order to save some time, I've already created that markup. So I'll just copy that and paste that in here. So let's quickly do that. I'll open up this gist. Perfect. So that's our login component. Let me just copy that and paste that in here. Save. Let's also do the SCSS for it. So I'll go to login SCSS, save that. And with this, let's see what we get. No, so this is our old app. This is our new app. So this one says sign in with Google and GitHub and stuff. Now, you might notice that the styles are a bit off, and that's probably because I installed Bootstrap, but I didn't really start using it. So in order to use that, I'll add the Bootstrap import to our styles SCSS. So bootstrap /test/css/ bootstrap.min.css. Save that, and hopefully with that the styles should look a bit better. Perfect. So now the login is looking as expected. For the profile card, I have something in mind which looks something like this. These are just the markups, by the way. So I'll actually implement the logic for it, but um, I just thought I might save some time by pre-coding the markup, right? So that's the login. That's if I go to profile, then that's the profile. This is how I'm envisioning both these components to look like. All right, now let's first try working on the login, right? At the moment, if I click on Google or GitHub, nothing really happens. Also, one quick thing that I'd like to do is to add like uh, some font or some styles so that I can get those icons and stuff. So I'll just go to the index.html. Now, there are definitely better ways of doing this, of using font awesome, but I just want to save some time here, and so I'm just doing it this way. Now you'll see that we are getting icons for GitHub as well as for Google. So that's all happening. Perfect. Now, if I click on these buttons, nothing really happens as such at the moment because we haven't really implemented these buttons. So let's first quickly go to the login component, and let me just close everything else. So that's our login component. That's the markup for it. There are two buttons in here. For both these buttons, I need to call some method. So let's say we handle the click click event on these two buttons, and let's call the login method for this. And I'll have to implement one. So I'll just get rid of the ng on init and stuff and implement login. Again, these methods return void. Okay. Now, these methods are supposed to call methods from the service that we just implemented, which is the auth service. So I'll inject the auth service as a dependency. So private read only auth service. Okay. And once the user clicks login, then I'll do something like this dot login dot, sorry, this dot auth service dot login. Now, as you can see, login is a method that returns an observable of something, right? So I need to do something once the user has logged in, and that's what will happen once I subscribe to it. But I usually tend to not subscribe to things. And so in order to avoid subscribing to something here, I will just create like a login observable, which is of type observable of anything at the moment, because I'm not really concerned about what this method returns. Uh, I'm just concerned about what needs to happen once that return has happened. So I'll just pipe through that, and I'll use a tap operator here because I want to make like some sort of a side effect here. And the side effect would be the navigation. So navigating the user from the login screen to the profile screen. So I'll inject router as a dependency, right? And in the tab, whatever I get, I'm not really concerned about that, but I just want to call this .router.navigate by URL and navigate to profile. Let's save this. Now it will say that property login has no initializer, and this is again that that's strict type checking that is happening. So in order to avoid uh, giving it an error, we'll just place a note here. And you can also figure it out actually by clicking on this bulb icon and then adding something like this here, or even either an undefined, or you can just specify a note here. As simple as that. Now, since I already have the login as an observable, and this observable needs to run this tap thing inside, we eventually have to subscribe to it. But instead of manually subscribing to it, I'll let Angular do it. And so in order to do that, I'll just use an async pipe. So I'll create an ng container and just do an ngif over here and use an async pipe instead, so that I don't have to manually unsubscribe from this subscription that might get created once I do that, right? So let's try now. If I click on Google, it opens up a pop-up, which is a good sign. Perfect. It now, I'll click on this user and hopefully it should redirect me to the profile page, which it is doing. So that's all good. Perfect. So login is happening as such, right? Now you might have noticed that we have two different buttons. One is for Google and one is for GitHub. We'll implement like the login with a redirect soon once we implement everything else, right? So once this is happening, let's go to the profile component. And inside the profile component, at the moment, these things that you see on the screen are hard coded, but it would make more sense to get them from the API response or from Firebase as such. So these would be like live data from the currently logged in user. And so in order to do that, I'll go to the profile component and let's get rid of the on init things and stuff like that. I'll go to the constructor and inject the auth service as a dependency. And I might also need the router because there is a logout button. And once the user clicks on that logout button, I need to also redirect the user back to login. So I'll inject router as a dependency, which is this right here. And after this, there are two things that we need. The first thing is the user object, uh, which would be coming in from the auth service. There is already a user dollar property that we created in there. So I'll use that in here. And there is a logout observable that we will create. And so the logout observable again is of type any. We don't really care as such, but we'll create a logout method. And this logout method is going to return void, but this will initialize the logout observable by a call to this.authservice.logout. And once the user logs out, we'll again pipe through that. And as a side effect, we will use the tap operator and use that router that we have injected as a dependency in order to navigate the user back to login, right? And so let's see what this is saying. So again, this is saying that this is giving that no initializer issue to us. And so in order to fix that, I'll just use the not operator here. And again, if I go to the profile, I'll just use the ng container with an ng if and use the async pipe in order to subscribe to this. Now, once this is happening, there might be scenarios wherein the user might not be logged in, and or we might not have gotten the logged in user's details. And so at that time, it makes sense to show some sort of a loading spinner or something like that. So I'll create an ng template for it. And in here, let's use an h1 tag that says loading. And let's name this as loading. And so here in this, what I will do is use again an ng if. But this time around, I'll first check if user async as user. So if user is defined, else we'll go to the loading section, right? So now once I have the user in place, let's just use the properties on the user object in order to show stuff. So things like the profile picture. So I think there is a display, photo URL property that I can use for this. For the alt text, I can use the display name of the user. So user.display name. And similarly, I can do something like user.displayname here. For the email, I can use user.email, and that's it, I think. So let's save. And as you can already see, there's a photo of me, there's my name, and there's my uh, email address. If I log out, nothing really happens as such. Uh, that's more of a glitch, but that can be fixed soon. And that brings us to the second part of the whole thing, which is how do we prevent the user to access the profile route once the user has logged out? Because at the moment, the user still tends to stay on the profile route, right? So what can be done about that? Well, um, what can be done is that we can either create a route guard, and this route guard is going to then redirect the user back to the login route uh, once the user is logged out. And so that's one thing, that's one option. A better option though is to use something that's provided by Firebase in the first place. So uh, Firebase also gives these router guards that can be used in order to implement route guards in our application so that we don't have to write that guard on our own. Firebase again takes care of it. So uh, in order to implement that, we'll just import a few things in here. And this is for the router configuration, by the way. So we'll go to the routing, and here we will import some things. And then we need this, wherein we need to redirect the user to a particular route once the user has logged out. So that's that. And then the last thing is that we will um, use these two properties, which is the can activate property and the data on it, right? So this says that there is an auth guard in place. And by the way, this is not supposed to go for login. This is supposed to go for profile. So I'll cut that from here and paste that in here. Save that. Perfect. Let's also get rid of the things that we are not really using. So these two. Save. Let's go back. If I click on logout. Okay, let's click on inspect and see if something's wrong. Well, wait, did I actually implement logout? That's the question. No, apparently I didn't implement logout, and that's why it's not working. So I'll just call logout in here once the user clicks on it. So if I click logout, it takes me back to login. Now, if I click on Google Sign-In again, select a different account, then you might see a different user account details here. If I click logout, it takes me back to login. If I try navigating to profile, then it doesn't allow me to do that as well. Now, this is something that we have done so far for Google, but I can do something similar for GitHub as well, and for other social channels that I can use in order to log in. So let's quickly go through a process of implementing this for um, GitHub, because that was easier. I could easily have access to the client ID and the client secret over there. So I'll just quickly go to um, the auth service. And in the auth service, at the moment, I've named this method as login, but instead of login, I'll call this as login with popup. And similarly, I'll create a method and call it as login with redirect. And instead of calling sign in with popup method on the Angular Fire auth service, I'll call sign in with redirect. And instead of Google auth provider, I'll be using the GitHub auth provider. Now, sign in with redirect returns to us a promise of type void, as you can see here. right? So instead of returning an observable of type Firebase user, Firebase auth user credential, I'll return an observable of type void, right? And with this, I'll go back to my login component. And instead of login here, I will do login to Google. And this would be login with popup. And similarly, I'll create another method here and call it login to GitHub and login with login with redirect. Let's save this. And in the HTML, instead of login, this would be login to GitHub, and this would be login to Google. Sorry, Google. Now, similar to what we did for Google, like we enabled the uh, sign-in provider for Google. We'll have to do that thing for GitHub as well. So I'll click on edit here, and as you can see here, it asks me for two things: the client ID and the client secret. Uh, Now, these two things are some things that I can uh, have access to if I navigate to my GitHub. Let's try that. I'll probably have to go to my settings, and there's developer settings in here. There's OAuth apps. Let's say if I just use this app for now, I can use this as my client ID. So I'll paste this. Sorry, I'll first enable this. I'll paste in the client ID. And as far as the client secret goes, I will, let's say we create a new one. Okay, so I'll copy this, paste this in here. Let's copy that. And I think the URL is the same, but yeah, let's confirm that and update, save. And once this is done, let's save this one as well. And after all these changes, if I try to log in with GitHub, this time around, you'll see that it navigated me or it redirected me to GitHub. And then once that is done, it brings me back to my application. But it didn't really take me to the profile route, which it was supposed to do. So what happens is that once it redirects me back to my application, it doesn't really have a sense of what's happening here, right? And so the only thing that can be done in this instance is to have some like root component listen to the auth state, and then based on whether the user is logged in or not, redirect the user to the profile route. So in order to do that, I will do something similar that I've done so far in my login component inside the uh, app component. So for this, what I will do is I'll just get rid of the title property. But yeah, in here I'll create a user dollar, which is an observable of type Firebase.user, and this is going to be equal. Let's just not initialize any at the moment, but yeah, we can do something like constructor private read only and auth service, and inside this I can just do something like this dot auth service dot user dollar, and this can either be this or it can be null. And I'll import Firebase from Firebase app, which it already did at the top. I'll go to the app component now and create an ng container. and just use an async pipe here. And with this, uh, yeah, this is not a default. This is a default import. So with this, if I click on Firebase, hopefully this time around, it should navigate us to a profile. Let's probably try doing that in the constructor. Okay, and yeah, one thing that I do need to do here is that uh, once the user is here, then I can just pipe through it, and then again use the tap operator, and then again do this dot router dot navigate by URL to not login but to profile, and I'll need to inject the router as well in the dependency. Okay, so that takes me to the profile route. If I click logout, let's try that again. If I click on GitHub, it should take me to the profile route. So yeah, that's done. I think that was like the end of my demo as well. So yeah, I'll just stop sharing and over to you in the studio, Roshan.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, Roshan, I can hear.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I'll just be right back while you engage with the audience.
Yep. Um, okay. So first of all, thank you very much for this session, Siddharth. It was very informative. We learned a lot about Angular and authentication with Firebase. Um, so we have a quiz prepared. I'm going to put the link in the chat so everybody can give a shot on that quiz, and we have some amazing prizes for 2 winners. Um, so thank you very much, and I would like to thank the GDG Adelaide team for supporting to organize this event, as well as Siddharth for doing amazing session, and hope to do another session in the future. So thank you very much, everyone. We will see you in the next one.